Tonight, we are joined by Darryl Cunningham to discuss his latest book, Putin's Russia, The Rise of a Dictator. Darryl is a cartoonist and the author of several nonfiction books on science, politics, and economics and other subjects, including psychiatric tales, science tales, and graphic science, Billionaires, The Lives of the Rich and Powerful, and many others. And we're really happy that he's joined us tonight. He's given talks at the London School of Economics and the City of Arts and Lights in Valencia. And in 2015, he was one of 30 artists and creatives who were invited to contribute to the Art of Saving a Life project to promote vaccination in the developing world. So his work is really great and really interesting. We're also joined by Hannah Berry. Hannah is a comics creator, writer, and illustrator, and the author of 3 graphic novels, including the award-winning socio-political satire Livestock. She was the 2019 to 21 UK Comics Laureate, and is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And their conversation is going to be chaired by Hazel Healy. Hazel is co-editor at The New Internationalist, which is a magazine that focuses on international and current affairs. She writes about social justice themes such as peace, feminism, and migration, and her work has also appeared in The Guardian, The LA Times, and on the BBC. And she also read a lot of Russian literature at an impressionable age and loves graphic novels, so she's a perfect host to have tonight. You'll see at the bottom of the screen that there's a Q&A box, and you can put your questions for Darryl, Hannah, and Hazel in there. There's also a chat box for a general discussion with the other attendees, and we'll be keeping an eye on both of them just to sort of moderate the discussion and ensure everything runs smoothly. If you feel like tweeting about the event, we are at Houseman's Books, and I'll put any of the links and information that you might need in the chat down the bottom. And with that, all of our housekeeping is done, and so I will disappear and hand over to Darryl. Thank you so much.
So Darryl at this point is going to show us some slides from his book. Are you having a technical problem, Darryl?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realise I was going to come straight to me, really. But yeah, so here is the book, Putin's Russia, The Rise of a Dictator, and I'll read out what it says on the back, which I wrote. From its origins as a street thug to the trash-strewn, rat-infested courtyards of post-war Leningrad, and his rise through the ranks of the KGB to his position as one of the most powerful men in the world. This is the tale of Vladimir Putin. So I basically tell the story from his childhood in post-war Leningrad to his rise to the premiership and everything that happened in between. So that's essentially what this is. So we're moving on to the interview.
Yes, so thanks for that little précis for us. We'll be dipping in and out of the book as we go. I'm going to be using this time just to put a few questions of my own to Darryl and also to Hannah, and to allow for some comic-to-comic conversation. And if you want to join at any time, please drop any questions you might have into the Q&A slot, and we'll pick those up from there. I must say it feels like a very timely moment to have this book. I'm going to flash it up again here, in case you didn't get to see it before, because
we could all hold up our copies at the same time.
We should all hold up our copies at the same time. And Putin has, of course, cemented or continues, to rule Russia with an iron fist. He's just won. His party, United Russia, of course, just won elections. I say won elections earlier this week, taking 50% of the vote amid much claims of fraud and videos of ballot boxes being, dumped. And, very low turnout of about 50%, which perhaps shows, just how apathetic Russians are feeling in relation to him and what, this charade of democracy. But he's also, there's another story there too, which is that he's also under pressure. Increasingly, there has been a barrage of demonstrations over environmental and social issues. And of course, Alexei Navalny continues to be a thorn in his side, even from prison. So it's an interesting time to be looking at Russia and Putin. So my first question for you, Darryl, really was, what inspired you to produce this book about Putin, and why now? What was your motivation?
It was a natural extension of my previous book, Billionaires, which looked at the sort of the 1%, the richest people in the world. So Billionaires is basically sort of 3 mini biographies in one book of Rupert Murdoch, the Koch brothers, who are like big oil and gas billionaires, and Jeff Bezos, of course, of Amazon. So I went to look at that class of super billionaires by just looking at those 3 people. Right? And when I'd finished the book, I was doing like promotional stuff for it, and people kept asking me what I was going to do next. And almost as a joke, I said, "Oh, I'm going to do a book on Putin," really, because it naturally seemed to extend to him, because he, of course, is in that super rich class. We don't really think of him in those terms. I mean, we don't really know how much money he is worth, but I've heard estimates above $200 billion, which would make him, comparable with people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and others. So, it's essentially Putin is also part of that same problem of vast wealth hoarding by a small number of people. So it was a natural extension of my last book that I should do this book, really. So that's where I was coming from.
Did you feel when you were drawing him that he really lent himself to cartoon villainy? That was something that occurred to me when I was reading it, that he lends himself naturally. He could almost be a Marvel villain in his shading.
He's more like a Bond villain, really. Well, I'm sure he thinks of himself in that way, almost, because certainly when he was growing up, he's very interested in spy movies, because the Russians obviously had their own film industry. He never saw James Bond, obviously, when he was a kid, but he would have seen the Russians' version of that, and that apparently inspired him to want to join what was then the KGB. So, he has all these sort of images of what of spying and espionage in his head from the very beginning.
Were you ever tempted to draw him in a more? I mean, I think there's one time when you draw him in a slightly more caricatured way, but it's usually a pretty accurate representation of his face. Were you ever tempted to draw him in a more?
I've tried, in this book, I've wanted to try and take a more realistic approach to everything, really, because I didn't want it to come across as sort of cartoony, really. I wanted to really push that this is very serious. I don't want to be jokey, to be seen as jokey in any way. So that's why it's mostly like that. There's a little bit of cartooniness in it occasionally, but I've mostly tried to try to do it as accurately as I possibly could. To the point where the next thing I'm doing, the one I'm working on now, I've completely rejected that and gone completely cartoony, because I end up hating drawing that way.
It's funny, because there are little moments of Cunningham levity in there, even though it's a really serious story. It's a very really serious book.
I can't keep it out. It has to come through somewhere.
But I like it. It kind of it makes the horrors more, I think, more horrifying, that there's this little touches of humor, and then, oh, by the way, this also happened. I think the comparison of the two is I don't know. It drives
it's just
home.
Naturally the way things come out. It's not like I had a master plan of how to do things. It's really interesting how things develop when you start on something, how it works out. Retroactively, you can always say, "Oh yeah, I planned that all the time." But
You should
I never
say
did.
that. I meant to do that all along.
Yes.
Can you give
that's
us
what a
an
lot of people do.
example, Hannah?
I'm sorry.
Can you give us an example of the touches of humour
Yeah, I think there's. I'm going to try and find one now. There's just moments where, for example, now if I was clever, I would have put a bookmark in here. I've not done that. There's a moment where.
Well, here's an image, for example,
there we
of
go.
That's macho Putin, like he liked to present himself as a very sort of macho person, like shirt off, but to the point of ridiculousness, as you can see, really.
Yeah, and then the other mad side to him, of course, or the more sort of side that's easy to send up is his approach to COVID and his fear of COVID. I think you've got a cartoon, one of the sections where you show the disinfectant tunnel that people have to walk through before they see him. Is there anything you'd like to say about his general paranoia when it comes to COVID?
Certainly, he was sort of for a year. He's more or less been his dasher. Apart from anyone, and people are having to like isolate for 2 weeks before they could even see him. And then even when they did go and see him, they had to walk through this special tunnel and be sprayed with chemicals, which surely can't have been good for them. So, you know, it's like a weird like tunnel they have to walk through.
Probably terrifying as well, being sprayed by a chemical from the man.
You don't even know what these chemicals are. You know, I mean,
No.
people have criticised him, saying, you know, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, really. You know, I think his big rival, who's now in prison, Alexei Navalny, said that it was like, referred to him as grandpa in the bunker. It's probably one of the reasons why he's in prison, actually.
Yeah. I found one of the examples that I was
brilliant.
when you're talking about the Magnitsky Act at the end. Just little moments like this where you know, I'd like my money and property. Nope. Little sort of illustrations like this that kind of that break up and then underneath there's somebody being beaten to death. It's just that I find the two side by side. It's really,
the conjunction really works, I think.
yeah, it makes it all the more harrowing.
I planned that all along, of course.
I thought so.
In fact, and one of the things you cover in this book very well is Putin's stranglehold over the media. And that's, of course, he moves straight away to exert control over the media as soon as he comes to power. That's something you cover. And actually, many of his victims are journalists and whistleblowers. And are there any particular stories or individuals that you'd like to highlight or share with us?
Well, Anna Politkovskaya is the person who comes to mind, and she was a journalist. She was shot to death in her apartment building. And previously, they tried to. She'd been trying to get on a flight to cover a terrorist outrage. She was very careful. She generally did not try take drinks and stuff on planes and stuff, because things like this happened before. But just this one time, she had a cup of tea, and I think, and she basically went to. Made her very ill, and she was in hospital for some time and never really recovered from that. But she did recover, only to be assassinated later on. And she was a vocal critic of Putin. And the day she was assassinated was his birthday as well, and people have often pointed out that this was kind of a present to him. There are a bunch of people were convicted of the murder. They were Chechens, but who hired these Chechens? That's still unknown. And she is just one of very many journalists who have been killed over the years as well.
Does it make you nervous at all, writing this?
Me, no, because I'm just small fry. That's why. The thing is that there are a lot of books about Putin and Russia out there. I mean, if there was any danger to me, all those people were dead already, and there aren't. So you know, I don't worry about it.
As of this recording.
As of this recording, yes. Looks around uncertainly. No, I don't worry about it, because I'm not in Russia. I'm not about to get on like a Russian plane. No, this, you know, no.
So we do have one question from the Russian consulate, and I'm only joking. It's a question from Woodrow Phoenix, and he says, "How did you handle the dialogue Did you only use reported speech from Putin, and were you careful not to put words into his mouth?
Oh, we were very super careful. I mean, my copy editor was absolutely ruthless with me that we should source every quote as much as we possibly could. Sometimes for cartoony reasons, I've done silly stuff, but mostly, I mean, it's obviously so, but mostly what's quoted is exactly what was said, obviously via translation. And we've referenced everything as fully as we possibly could. We went over and over it.
Yeah, in fact, there's a significant list of references and sources in the back, you know, for people who want to read more.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
was more
always
careful
reference?
with.
Were you more careful with this book? Do you always reference?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's because certainly in the past I've not been as careful as I should have been. Mostly because I was sort of feeling my way into this really with non-fiction books previously, and I didn't really know the exact rules. But you know, as I've gone along, I've sort of learned, oh, you should do this and you should do that. So by this book, I was determined to be, you know, exact about it, and my editor and copy editor were there, you know, to do almost enforce it, make sure that I got it right.
Have you got a background in journalism? Was it just this sort of stuff that you've kind of?
No, I haven't really. No, I just had to sort of pick it up as I went along, really. I'm sure I made blundering mistakes along the way, but nothing intentional, I can tell you.
It seemed to have good journalistic rigor to me as an editor. Well, I was particularly impressed how you condense such a vast amount of information into such a
well, that was
easily digestible form. I know that's a lot.
I assembled all the material, and then this book, you know, I'll hold up the book again. It was more of a collaborative job, really, than any book I've done previously, because Corinne, my editor, and Vicky, the copy editor, were much more involved than I usually have people. I'm usually very much a one-man band, but we all sort of piled in and did a lot of work on this book. And so we wanted to be exactly right. So we worked very hard on it, to the point where I was super stressed by it all, really.
How long did it take you? Sorry, Hannah. How long did it take you to produce, to make it from sort of start to finish?
It's the shortest book I've done for a long time, but it still took me the same length of time that it took me Billionaires, which is twice as thick. And so about 2 years on and off, I was working on it. Yeah, usually takes that long. Because I have to draw it, and you know, I have to collate, get all the material together, assemble all the material, then gradually sort of sift it, and then sort of read it, keep reading it until I sort of understand it. And when I get to a point where I think other people can ask me questions and I can answer them fluently, then I realise that I'm at the right level of understanding to begin the book, and then I just start drawing it one page at a time, really, pretty much as you see. With, I don't thumbnail. I always tell people, cartoonists, don't do books the way I do them, because the way I do them is all wrong. Basically, you're supposed to sort of thumbnail everything, and I don't do any of that. No, I just get going with it, and then if I need to throw out a page here and there, I do, but I very rarely need to.
I mean, how do you choose what you drop out? I mean, do you write a huge sort of essay at the start?
No,
and then...
no, I don't. But well, the useful thing of doing sort of a non-fiction, especially biographies, is the structure is already there. So I know what the structure is, and then I know roughly what the page count is going to be. So I just instinctively know the kind of pace it needs and what the main points are going to be. So I don't have to, it's not like writing a novel where you have to sort of know every beat. It's already kind of laid out for you. You just sort of follow it along and try to, you know, make the points that you need to make. The difficulty is what to leave out, really, because there's so much stuff. There's such masses of information. You've got to keep, with this book, I had to keep to, the thread was always to try and come back to Putin each time. Each time it sort of wandered off into, like, say, describing the war that's happening in Syria, or the war the problems the war in Ukraine right now, or like some terrorist atrocity. I always had to remember to bring it back to Putin eventually, because it's ultimately his story as well as Russia's.
But there's nothing sort of about his, his personal life, or it doesn't really go into his.
I was going to go. I did a little bit at the beginning, but then that got sort of lost along the way, really.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem relevant after a while. I think the political side of things seemed much more important, really. Also, it's a lot of his personal stuff is shrouded in secrecy, and you can't be sure any of it's true.
Have you heard any interesting, juicy bits? Any gems?
No, not
any hot Putin gossip?
No, it's nothing.
Well, we'll make some up. It's fine.
Well, that's exactly what I couldn't do, of course.
I had the same feeling that after having just read a book about him, I felt I knew very little of who he was, but I felt, like you said, in a way that was a fair representation of the situation, in the sense that he's surrounded by so much propaganda. How on earth would you know? I mean, there are armies of Russian trolls. How would you know what truth, what was true when it came to Putin, and how to trust your source when it came to Putin?
Well, this is it. I mean, occasionally, especially the early stuff, I do sort of couch in, this is what we know. And a lot of this comes from Putin himself. And he's a big propagandist, so you have to take what he says with understanding that he's trying to project a certain a view of himself. But even so, some things are absolutely, we do know that he was born in Leningrad, that he was after the war, that his father was in the secret police and in the army before, actually served in a submarine before that. So some things are absolutely, we do definitely know.
There's a comment in the chat. Are you trying to get Daryl assassinated, Hannah? Sorry, Daryl.
No.
I am. We've established before this in the warm-up chat that I am.
I'm just going to tell the Russians that it was all your idea.
I've been activated, so. Soz.
Oh no, sleep.
Nice to know you.
So yeah, in fact, that was one of the things that surprised me. There's one of the first early panels where you say that he was born in Leningrad just 7 years after the end of the war, and you realise quite how old he is, and also how his childhood experiences, the world he was born into, and how
literally. I mean, you have to think
the rubble he was born into.
I mean, his parents were scarred by the Second World War. They almost starved to death in the siege of Leningrad. So he grew up with adults around him who'd come through this terrible time, and he was formed really by all those kind of events. And he was basically, he's quite a small man, and of course he must have been a small child always, but he was very tough and quite a scrapper, according to childhood friends who were around that period as well. And so he was often fighting with boys quite much bigger than him, but he was a kid who wouldn't give up, in a fight. Would use any dirty method, he was said, to fight. He would bite, he would scratch, he would punch, and you get a sense that he took this attitude into politics as well, that any possible method was good, however dirty, and he's always been a dirty fighter.
And actually, some of those friends are on paper, the sort of holders of vast fortunes, aren't they, in his name? You get the sense that maybe those are the people he can trust, perhaps, in the strange world that he lives in, the people he knew from his childhood.
That's true. They're people he doesn't hold a lot of money himself. He's like an old-fashioned mafia mobster, really, in the way that they don't hold their own money. They'll have sort of proxies who actually hold the money for them. And he tends to have a lot of people that he knew from his childhood or when he was growing up to do that for him. But the thing is, it's just impossible to estimate how much money he actually has because of all these fronts. Essentially, because him and his little crew of people have been ransacking the Russian oil and gas reserves and all the money for like 2 decades now. He could essentially be, the richest guy in the world. We wouldn't know anything in Russia, and is effectively owned by him while he's in power. So you can't estimate. There's no limit to really any way of estimating how much money he actually has. There are we do know that there's this massive palace on the coast of the Black Sea, which he's got, which is
which he claims not to own, of course.
Which he claims not to own, but as a no-fly zone around it, as its own harbour, as a helipad, as a church, as like a theatre, cinemas, all sorts of stuff. It's actually the whole area, its grounds and everything is bigger than the town that's next to, and it's meant. They try to portray it as just a hotel complex, but it isn't, because no one can go there really.
You can see why he got on well with Trump, can't you?
Well, that's another section of the book, the Trump. I do go into that quite a bit, the relationship between Trump and Putin, and how it's more than likely that, we definitely can. Well, let's not say, why not say it? Trump was a Russian asset and had been for decades, and was still very much in their control. And I'd lay out the evidence for it in the book. So, you can read it and decide for yourself whether you think it's true or not.
Did you mean, I wasn't sure actually when I read that, did you mean that he was knowingly an asset, or they were grooming him, but he wasn't aware that he was acting in their interests?
Sometimes it's the case that people don't know that they've been manipulated, but often, like businessmen can, how they recruit people is that they'll get you in some compromising position. It's an old as espionage story and the trick of like blackmailing someone, and with Trump is possibly tied very closely to the money that he has. At one point he could not get, because of his 5 bankruptcies, he couldn't get any money any loans inside the United States. So he had to go abroad, and a lot of that money which comes through Deutsche Bank, is a well-known bank that for laundering Russian money, and they've been investigated for this. It seems to come through Deutsche Bank. So a lot of those loans seem to come from Russia.
Given how much is happening and continuing to happen, how easy was it to finish the book there, and how hard was it? Were you tempted to sort of just hang on and wait to see what else occurs that could go?
Well, in that case, I would still be writing it, wouldn't I? Because
it might never end.
Well, there's the trouble with writing about contemporary events is, when it keeps. I want to scream out the window, please stop, because I'm writing a book now, so just stop, right? But no, I couldn't do that. So at some point you just have to stop, you just have to stop and then hope that nothing really seriously incredible happens. So it's as up to date as it can be.
Was there pressure to finish there, or did you like to put a book out at that particular time, or would you? Would you do like a Putin 2?
I'd rather not, frankly. I'd rather not. There was one. I've been thinking about this today. The one area that I didn't touch was Russian involvement in Brexit. I didn't touch that, and partly because I'm sick of the subject, partly because I just couldn't cover everything, and partly because I was a bit wary of one of the main players in the Brexit Russia story is incredibly litigious and is suing at least one journalist right now. So I was wary of touching it, and I didn't know. it's still in the back of my mind that I'm going to cover that in the future. That people keep saying to me, "Oh, you should do the story of Brexit." And I thought, well, yeah, I could do the story of Brexit, or I could just poke my eye out. Both would be like just as unpleasant, But I can see myself, because of the kind of person I am, I'm going to be covering that subject eventually.
Yeah, can't stay away.
Because it is a fascinating story, really, what we have done to ourselves.
All this sovereignty we now have, it's glorious, glorious.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, and it's not that I'm trying to blame Russia for Brexit. I mean, they obviously had their own interests in breaking us off from the EU, but they were pushing out an open door. We have done this to ourselves.
Yeah.
We did have a question a little bit earlier on from Bonbon, who may or may not be, a real person, or could even be a troll. But Bonbon says innocently.
No, she's actually my partner.
Hi, Bonnie. All these, code names. I don't know. The sweetest might be the most dangerous. You just never know. But Bonbon asks, what's the most interesting thing you learnt whilst researching this book?
Oh my God, all of it's so interesting, really. I mean, what jumps out is the stuff that I absolutely didn't know about what I've described about his early life, and in the aftermath of the Second World War. That's still the most interesting stuff to me as well, I think. Sorry, that isn't more of a comprehensive answer, Bonnie.
Can I ask you a really nerdy process question?
Go ahead. I wish you would.
I was wondering, because sometimes in your book you use, it's all pretty much hand drawn, but then it's all pretty much drawn, but then sometimes you'll use photo images sort of with a filter, or overlaid with something in the book. And I was wondering if you use that for when do you use that? Tell me about how you use that.
Yeah, well, it's just that I want it to be as realistic as possible, because I tend to think of it as like a documentary comic, really, and I didn't want to, as I explained earlier, I didn't want it to be too cartoony, and I wanted it to come across as really kind of, realistic, and so that the brutal stuff comes across as brutal, and I wasn't making light of it, and partly it's a confidence issue to do with my drawing, that I feel it's just that my style of drawing is not like a very realistic approach. So I've had to use a lot of photo reference. I didn't really want to do it, but I just felt I had to use that crutch quite a bit in this book.
Yeah.
And it works, but I'm not entirely happy with it, really, but it works very well.
Yeah, I think the times when I'm thinking about it, having said that you used photo images, I think it's largely explosions. There's like two or three times where you've used that, and that the change.
I can't even remember what that was.
Emphasis.
Really.
Well, I've just read it,
I kind of swapped techniques about halfway through, so I was mostly drawing it using Photoshop, and then about halfway through I got an iPad and started drawing it entirely using Procreate, so it changed a little bit after that. I can see the difference, but probably no one else can.
Actually, there's having said it was the explosions, there's also this in the
that
protest,
is
famous protest.
Yeah, I didn't draw that. I just basically stole it.
Yeah, I've seen it around. I think it's great that that's in there.
But I don't think the protesters will mind, really.
There's a question in the chat. Do you think Putin will read it?
Who knows? But I have no idea.
Do you think he'll watch this?
Who knows? You just don't know who's going to be watching these things, who picks up your books. You never know.
I get the feeling he might quite like reading about himself. I mean, he may not like everything that's in it, but I feel like it might be quite a appealing cover for Putin, which is my prompt to hold it up again. I think Phil might quite like that on his wall, on his bathroom, maybe.
Would you sell it to him? Would you sell him the print?
Anyone, anyone's if he's paying for it, he can have as many as he likes.
Here's a bit. These are the end papers, actually,
Right.
from.
Are these the examples of the photographic method?
Yeah, there's a lot of very exact drawing I had to do. I mean, there's a lot of machinery and tanks and planes, and I want to make that as realistic as possible as well.
Do you think that there's a role for graphic novelists, cartoonists when it comes to telling these kinds of stories? And one of the things I commissioned for New Internationals is our section, sort of cartoon section from the cartoon movement. And there's so much about freedom of expression, so much about power. What is it you think that lends itself to this form to kind of call out these sort of violations of democracy and freedoms? So,
What do you mean in terms of comics generally?
Yeah.
Well, there's a strong political tradition using comics as propaganda, and I just feel this kind of book kind of fits into that tradition in a way. And also I think because comics, the very medium itself lends itself well to taking complex subjects and breaking them down into an understandable and I wouldn't say simple and understandable format.
accessible.
So you can take, an accessible way, really. And also because, you, unlike something like a movie like that, you can just you can, if you don't understand something, you can just reread it. And, it's all there, very much laid out, easy to read. Even though it's a very complex book with masses of information, I think if you do it well, you can present it in an almost effortless way. One of my, I should hold one moment. I'll just give you an example of something.
Talk amongst ourselves.
Well, I was going to ask you the same question actually, Hannah, after.
Oh.
So prepare you.
So I'm a big fan of Ernie Bushmeller's Nancy. Ever seen this strip anyway? It was a very well known, it's still going now, but done by another person. So they used to say about Nancy, the newspaper strip, and what it essentially is, it's very simple, often a 4-panel thing, very easy to read. I think R. Spiegelman said of Nancy that by the time you've decided not to read it, you've already read it. So, and that's my attitude to comics, really. That I don't want people to be almost aware that they're reading it. So I try to get out of the way, really. I try not to do a lot of very fancy layouts where you're trying to work out where to look on the page. It's more or less straightforward reading it. So it's you're never aware of even turning the page. You're not aware of trying to work out what's going on. So it's all very, very straightforward. So that's my approach to it, to make the reading experience, never get in the way of the reading experience, make it as simple as possible, because I've got so much complex information to get across. You don't want to get in the way of that, and you don't want to get between you and that information and the reader.
You've done a great job. I mean, speaking as an editor as well, it's very crisp. You've got so much in there. You don't waste a single word. It's a real achievement.
Well,
I wouldn't have picked up a book about Putin actually, because can't bear him. I just don't want to. But actually, I would pick up and read a graphic novel, and not just because I'm going to chair a conversation about Putin. It just has an appeal. It just sort of helps you get there, doesn't it, and absorb the information in a less depressing way or something.
I mean, it is the biggest espionage story in the world. If you want to really read a really good thriller, then this is it, and it's all true as well. There's nothing bigger. It's one of the biggest stories in the world, and it's very rarely told. We know, all of us know bits of his story. What we don't know is how it all fits together. One of the things that I enjoyed most about, often with my books, I often find that I know little bits of the story, but it's how it's all connected together, and it's discovering the whole picture, really. And this gives you the whole picture.
Yeah, I will say, having read the book, I've struggled to think of a bigger story internationally. I mean, that seems to tie into so many world events that it sort of underpins the world as it is at the moment. It was, and I'm kind of surprised that I didn't know more about it. It's sort of strange that all this information is out there, but it's not.
Well, our media is not great at telling us everything, really. It doesn't give us comprehensive information. The trouble is partly not the media's fault. It's partly that, how do you tell these stories and put it all together in that way? It's just not easy, really. So, especially the news for working from day to day. So you get these snippets of things, but you don't see what the context is, really. You see a war in Ukraine, and you see the stories of ex-spies being poisoned in Salisbury, but you don't see how these things are all connected. Really, you don't see how that's connected to Trump in the White House. All these things are connected, usually from money and Russian money.
Hannah, sorry, just to circle back again for a minute. And did you have anything to add to the ways in which the role comic journalism has in raising awareness, and maybe mention, your book about the cult of celebrity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the great strengths of comics is that they are perceived as being very simple and very accessible. And I think because of that, they very much slip under the radar. And I hadn't heard that quote before. That's great. The Art Spiegelman quote that, by the time you decide not to read it, you've already read it. I mean, I think that's I don't know, it's such a simple method of getting across information. And also, I think in satirizing things as well. I think I think often cartoon strips in newspapers, which are a dying art form, but because of funding in the media. But
we have 4 every edition. I'm just saying.
Sorry?
4 every edition, 4 cartoons every edition.
Apart from you guys, it's a dying art. I think it's such an important lens to look at the world through, and because it is so accessible, and because everyone has this kind of a more or less an innate understanding of this visual language. It's very appealing, and it is overlooked as being quite often childish and facile, and for that reason I think that's almost its strength, that it can as I say, slip under the radar in many cases.
Yeah, well, it often is childish and facile, and I enjoy the childish and facile as much as anyone. But it's not everything that comics can do.
No.
And one of the things about comics is because you've got very little space for text on a page, and that makes you concentrate very carefully on the word count. And because of that, you have to make every word count. So in some ways it's akin to poetry in a way, because you've got to get as much information as possible with as few words as possible. So anyone who's really good at that can do a very powerful job.
Given all that, what do you think there's any reason why there aren't more graphic journalists working at the moment?
It's really hard.
Fair.
And there's not a lot of money in it.
Yeah, I guess not in any area of journalism. It's not.
Well, the arts generally is just, why are we doing this? Well, I do it because I have to, really. This is what I do.
I mean, are you sort of? But presumably, you're happy telling these stories. You wouldn't want to work for your Marvels or DCs, for example, and earn a fast buck. You'd rather tell these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I mean,
No offense.
I'd be very reluctant to work for. I wouldn't work for any of the big corporate. Because I want to keep copyright of my own stuff for a start. When you see what's happened to creators in the past, it's criminal. It's criminal that they basically had everything stolen. You think Jack Kirby was the guy who built Marvel is the house that Jack built, and he never saw. Even now, he's not given the credit for what he did. People think Stan Lee was created Marvel. Stan Lee was just a guy, happened to be there as well. He was just the office boy to begin with. No, so I can't do that. Not that I've got anything against doing superheroes and stuff, but I would do it my way.
And tell non-fiction sort of journalistic stories?
Well, the next book I'm working on is fiction. I've just needed a complete break, so I thought. And the beauty about fiction is that you can just make everything up. Isn't that brilliant?
Nice.
There's no constraints at all. It's fantastic. The freedom I've been feeling just writing this story is just incredible, really.
And the reference section at the end, empty.
No reference section at the end. I made all this up. None of it's true.
It's be a relief. So we do have another question, thank you, from Woodrow. And he says, what's the line between opinion pieces and pulling all the evidence and writing a conclusion? How do you draw that line? Where do you see the line between opinion pieces and pulling all the evidence together and drawing a conclusion? You're gonna have some analysis in your selection.
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult, really, because and I do think carefully about that, and I don't generally sort of reveal my hand until the end of the book, really. And that was true in Billionaires as well. I didn't really sort of reveal my true thought about it. And what I tend to do is just present
your tone quite neutral, don't you?
I keep it neutral. I said, these are the facts. You draw your own conclusion. And at the end, I will say, this is what I think, in effect, really. That's my opinion bit at the end. But mostly, I just think, if you tell the story, people condemn themselves, really.
Yeah, I will say we do have, in New Sashes, we do have, he's in the audience, so I feel I should plug his section, Ilya's Cartoon History, which is a
marvellous.
Yeah, unless he negotiates an extra page from his section editor, which is not unheard of. It's 4 pages, and it takes a person from history, a forgotten, overlooked sort of global South history often, and recounts historical events over 4 or 5 pages.
That's a great idea.
This was Hono Heke, and we've got the second part coming up in our next edition. Actually, it's a 2-parter. Previous to that, we've had Minnick Wallace and others, and that's like the jewel in the crown. Without giving too much away, I mean that's the most expensive thing we commission, is that piece, because it's like a treat. We know it's a visual treat, and it's something completely unique that you can't get anywhere else. So at New Sashish, we do believe it's something that readers enjoy, and that we should keep bringing into our journalism as much as we can in terms of what we offer. So yeah, big up non-fiction graphics from us too. When I was looking into this, it's actually a piece we had in our August edition, and it was about the renaissance in local journalism. I don't know if this is something you've come across, Daryl, but there's actually, because of the stranglehold on the media nationally, it's lots of bloggers and regional and local investigative outlets have been running stories. And interestingly, much like New Nationalists, they're reader supported, so that although the Kremlin can arrest people and charge them with tax fraud and harass them, it actually can't cut off their sources of money quite so easily as they could in the past. So they've been running stories like environmental stories, taboo topics like LGBTQ communities, stories about penal colonies under COVID, stories where they've managed to, but all the falsehoods around COVID, that while the state propaganda was showing like the gleaming empty hospitals, they were broadcasting pictures of harassed medical staff and no beds and so they've actually been able to provide a sort of counter narrative to the state propaganda. And in fact, one of the quotes says that our older readers have started to change their views of people who were previously loyal to Putin when presented with this information. So do you see, I don't know if you're aware of that, but do you see something hopeful there that people might have just be a bit sick of it, and that this new sort of distributed, reader-supported media might have a chance of getting around him?
I hope so.
In a way that bigger kind of oligarch-owned institutions haven't been, because they're too similar to him in many ways.
It's really impossible to know how popular a dictator is in a dictatorship. It's impossible to really know, because people are not free to speak, really. But I hope that there is that groundswell under there. One thing that I would always say when things look very sort of, we're living through quite a dark time in history, I think, and moving seems to be darker. That I'm old enough to have lived through things like in the Cold War, and seen the end of the Cold War, and seen the end of apartheid in South Africa, and the end of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And I remember certainly when I was growing up, all those things seemed cast in iron, that they could unchangeable problems that could never be resolved, and yet ultimately they were resolved. And when people look back, they may think, oh, well, it was obviously they were going to change. It was going to change at some point, but when we were in that time, it did not seem that way. So you can never tell. All we can be sure of that there will be change. Nothing is permanent. And things like, Putin looks like incredibly solid, got a total grip on everything in Russia, but you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah, there's always hope. I would say that.
That would be such a good note to end on. We've got like 6 more minutes. I've got one more like really depressing question.
We just sit quietly in.
We should all just reflect on that. But the thing to bring it back to something really depressing, the thing when I was reading this, his crimes just stack up, and one after the other after the other. And I know something about seeing them all together in the book, or set forward so sort of bluntly, and it just made me astounded that he's kind of able to move around the world and attend these summits. And I wonder if you had the same sort of feeling, that it was remarkable that he wasn't a pariah. There are sanctions on certain individuals at the moment, aren't they, connected to Salisbury killings and things like that? But did you have the same feeling, like the same sense of incredulity?
Well, yes, the West is
still at large, I suppose.
Particularly weak when in dealing with Russia, with Putin in particular. Dictators don't ask why not. They just go ahead, and if there's no resistance, they'll just push further. This sort of always happens. So you can't show because there hasn't been pushback on certain things. It's pushed. This business in Ukraine now, that should never have happened. If the West had been strong to begin with, they would never have pushed as far as they have. They're basically, there were elections, Russian elections in Ukraine. Ukraine is not part of Russia, shouldn't be thought of as part of Russia. Why are we tolerating that? It's unacceptable that he should be, going around the world and people are talking to him as if he's, a statesman. He's not a statesman. He's head of a crime cartel that's hijacked an entire country, and he should be seen in that context.
Do you think we have a kind of responsibility to be aware of these things, and then being aware of them, share them with other people?
Do I have that?
Do you think we all have that responsibility?
Yes, we do have that responsibility, yes. Especially you, Hannah.
I'm going to buy everybody this book for Christmas.
Good.
Spread that responsibility.
And maybe just a final sort of forward future-facing question. Could you tell us any more about your, we've got a proposal here to write a book about Boris Johnson. So if you keep that in your back pocket, that's another live and evolving.
Well,
one.
if I ever do that book on Brexit, it'd be very much part of
It'll
that
be the
story.
main part. Did you want to give us, just before we wrap up, like a little glimpse of sense of what your book is about, your fictional graphic title that you're working on at the moment, just to...
I won't say too much about it, but it's basically a horror story. It's basically my old love of old Hammer films and those kind of things and ghost stories. And so it's basically about a family who were having to face up to a kind of supernatural crisis, really.
Ooh. This is very different.
Yes.
But
Sounds intriguing.
does any of the research for this book, any of the research for your other books, has any of that kind of influenced what you're writing?
No, but I still did end up doing research on stuff, lots of stuff, just because that's what I do, just so that I could inform properly what I was writing. Well, I don't often, whether I use that research is another matter, but I have to know what it is, you know. So, and I do enjoy doing the research, really. So
Feels like there's lots of dystopian material to draw on at the moment, so lots to draw on for that. So I think that brings us to the end. I don't know if Alice is going to jump in again. Oh, she's jumping in by chat. But I wanted to say thank you very much to Daryl and Hannah for joining us tonight, and to Daryl for sharing his secrets about how he puts together entire books without thumbnails. And
Very impressive.
and Hannah for bringing the comics perspective.
I'm quite mad. That's how I do it. Really.
Clearly.
And also thank you very much to our attendees for coming along and listening to us this evening.
Well, thanks to Hannah for being such a good interview. Thanks to you, and thanks to Housemans for letting me do this. Thank you very much.
Great. And I think to buy the book, I should say that the link is in the...
Here's the book, look, here's the book.
Daryl will now do a reading of the book for the 7
For the
hours.
next 5 hours, yes. Join me.
Would you ever do an audiobook reading? Sorry, this is right like an epilogue.
This is just running on now.
Yeah.
I'm not sharing this now. This is just wild. This can just run now. Yeah.
Is there a point in doing an audiobook of a comic strip?
You could describe the images.
Yeah, I suppose you could, really. Yeah, it would work, I think.
Yeah, audio descriptive. Anyway, just a thought.
No, no,
Also-
probably not. Do it as a podcast.
Yeah.
Great.
That's something for you.
So,
Yeah,
on that
I'll leave
note,
that to you, though.
I'm gonna... Okay, thanks everybody.